Welcome to the Electronic Armory's first video in the beginner series of developing apps for Android. I'm your Electronic Armorer for Android, and I have over 10 years of teaching experience at the university level. I have developed over 40 native mobile applications in Android and iOS, so I can't wait to share some professional advice, code, and tips on getting started the right way in developing some real-world applications in Android. After downloading Android Studio from the Google website and installing it, Android Studio will ask you to install the Android Software Development Kit, or SDK. The defaults are fine. Android Studio will then download and install that SDK so that you can begin using it to develop your own Android apps. After it's done installing, you should be greeted with this Welcome to Android Studio setup wizard. We'll walk through each one of these steps one by one in future videos, but for now I simply want to get you up and running and create your own simple Android application. So let's get started. The first option is to start a new Android project. We'll select that option. The next screen you see is going to allow you to name your project and give your company domain. For our case, our application is going to be called just Quiz. For the company domain, we're going to name this after our website. We're going to type in Electronic Armory. And for the beginning here, we're just going to get rid of that. All right, so our package name is going to be com.electronicarmory.quiz. Quiz is going to be the name of our application. This is our company domain. Project location is just fine, so we'll just keep that and hit next. Now it's going to ask us what type of devices we want this to run on. By default, the phone and tablet is selected. Now the minimum SDK that you see here, if we drop this down, this list gives you the minimum OS version that the user has to have installed in order to install your application. So let's just keep the defaults here. Now, Android Studio is going to ask you what type of application do you want to start with. We're going to start with a blank activity and show you the different steps that it takes in order to get something on the screen and running. So let's just select blank activity here and hit the next button. Some people like to name their activity root activity, but the default here, main activity, is fine again. So the next button is faded out and we will just hit finish. And Android Studio will create our project for us. So the Gradle build system is going to set up our application, compile the code, and construct our application, but you don't need to worry about that. Okay, and when it's all done, you should see this little tip of the day window pop up. I'm going to go ahead and close that. In the center, you'll see this representation of an Android device with the text "Hello World." Let me expand this window full screen so you can see more of the application. On Mac, you can double click on the title bar here, and on Windows, of course, you can hit the maximize button. So what we're initially seeing here is the interface builder. Now we have all these different widgets on the left hand side here. We have plain text view. We can drag this in here. We can align it to the left and below this hello world text. We can put it right on top. We can align it to the right, etc., etc. I'm just going to drag it in here. And on the right hand side, we can see that our new text view that we just dropped in here has the value new text. Now if you look down below that, you can see different properties of that text box. We can do different things like set the background color, we can set whether it's centered or left justified or that sort of thing, but we're going to leave it alone for now. And actually I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And for our quiz application, we want to be able to ask the user a question and have them respond by pressing a button and having the application respond to that logic to tell the user whether they're correct or incorrect. So the first thing we're going to need is a question. What question you ask is really up to you. For our purposes, we're going to ask what the default IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, is for Android development. So the first part we need to do is ask our user a question. We're going to use a text field for that. We already have an existing text field in there, but I'm going to go ahead and delete it just in case you don't have that in there. So you can either right click and delete or just hit the delete key when that's selected. So I'm just going to do that. And from the left panel here, I'm going to drag in plain text view, drag it in there, and I'm going to double click on it. And this window appears that it's going to ask me the text that I'm going to put in here. So what is the official IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, for Android development? Okay, click off of that and you'll see this. Now I want to give the user two choices to select from. So those are just going to be represented by two buttons. And so we find the buttons here on the left-hand side, drag one of those in there, double click on there to rename the button, and we're going to say Eclipse. And we're going to give this ID something a little bit more descriptive than just button. We're just going to say Eclipse, lowercase, click off of that. And I'm going to drag in a new button for Android Studio. So again, double clicking on that, changing the ID here, and clicking off of that. And so now we have two choices for this. What we also want to do is give a text field for the response, whether the choice that was chosen was correct or not. So let's drag in a second panel here, and you can see that if we center it here, we get a nice indicator that we are going to center that. So let's go ahead and do that. And it has a default text in here, and I'm just going to leave that alone. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the right-hand side where the properties are and scroll down all the way down to the bottom to visibility. Now you can see the title here, and the value is on the right. If I click on that value, you can see visible, invisible, or gone. Well, I don't want this to actually show up until the user has selected the choice, so I'm going to choose invisible. And you can see that's disappeared, but it's also, the outline here is also visible. All right, and that's how we set up interfaces here in Android. We're going to go up to the AVD, or Android Virtual Device Manager. Selecting that brings up this window, and we can create a virtual device that we can run our application on our computer. So let's go ahead and do that. Android Studio brings up a list of different devices that we can run. There's a Nexus 5, a Nexus 4, a Nexus 6, for example, and these have different screen sizes and resolutions. And you can check out the different screen resolutions and determine which will best fit your application. This is also a great way of testing multiple devices, multiple screen sizes, resolutions, and orientations across the many Android devices that are out in the wild today. I'm just going to go ahead and select the Nexus 5. Next, Android Studio is going to ask you which system image would you like to install on your Android virtual device. Now, because I'm running on a PC, I am going to select an x86 image. Now, I'm actually running a x86 64, so I'm going to actually go ahead and download this version, x86 64 Android 6.0 with the Google APIs. Android Studio is telling me that I need to download this, so let's go ahead and download this. Once Android Studio has downloaded your system image, you should see the selected image in your list here, and you can hit the next button. However, with the AVD system, it's very slow, and so Android Studio is recommending that we install the Hacksim for better emulation performance. You can install that via this link here. Also, you might see all the different API levels here and be very confused by it. If you are confused by it, then click on the API level distribution chart. You can see which version of the operating systems are on the different devices. And so if you go back as far as 2.3 Gingerbread, you can see that 96.2% of devices have at least this or greater installed. We're using 4.0 Ice Cream Sandwich, and so that covers 92.8% of users, which is pretty good. If you wanted to go up to 4.1, you'll only hit about 81% of users. And so is it really worth that extra 10%? That's up to you. And so by default, Android Studio selects the API level 15 as its default. For our Android virtual device, we're just going to select the latest Marshmallow operating system. So let's hit next. Now it's going to ask us to name the device. Give this device something descriptive, because when you create all these different Android virtual devices, you're going to be very confused on which settings and which resolution, which operating system, etc. each one of these has. I'm just going to go ahead and keep the defaults and click Finished. Android Studio is going to create that Android virtual device for us and put it in a new list. Okay, so now we have our Android virtual device, and we see our Android virtual device manager. We only have one right now, but we want to go ahead and start that. And so to do that, we hit this play button. Android Studio is telling us that Hacksim is not installed and is required to run. Would we like to install this now? Yes, let's go ahead and do that. Let's select the recommended defaults. Android Studio will download this automatically and install it for us. Okay, the Hacksim installer is done running, and what this is going to do is it's going to allow Android virtual devices to run more efficiently on our computer. I'm actually only going to make one change here, and that's going to be turning off the use of the GPU and selecting Store a Snapshot for faster startup. It's going to actually save the state of the Android virtual device and allow me to start that up quicker. All right, now that that's saved, let's go ahead and hit the play button to start it up. After starting the Android virtual device, you should see an Android emulator appear on your screen. It may take a few moments for the operating system to begin and start up, but don't worry, it hasn't frozen. After a little while of waiting, your Android virtual device will finally load up, and it'll give you a default screen for basically what Android will show a new user. So you can dismiss that if you want. Now that it's all set up, you can explore your Android virtual device, or you can go back to the IDE, hit the play button to run your application on your Android virtual device. Android Studio pops up a device chooser to select that device. Since I already have it running, it'll show up in this list of running devices. If it's not running, we can launch the emulator via this radio button here. Android Studio will compile our application and deploy it to our emulator to run on it. The Android emulator may not pop up to the foreground, so you might have to click on it. And here's our application that we developed. Now you can select these buttons, but since we don't have any logic to it, it doesn't do anything. So join us in the next video when we add logic to these buttons in order to make them do something useful for our application.